Hello, welcome back to our Lunchtime Lives. I'm Jordan Evans-Hill here at the Charles Dickens Museum. You can see Charles Dickens actually just over my shoulder above the fireplace there. He's quite a young man in this portrait. It dates from about 1837, that portrait. And in fact, the reading I'm about to share with you is one of his earlier ones as well. It's from Martin Chuzzlewit. It's not one of his most well-known novels today. In fact, Martin Chuzzlewit kind of struggled at the time. It was the only one of Dickens's novels that did not outsell the rest. The sales each month began to go down, and that caused a lot of panic for him. But it's actually a really interesting novel. It's really fascinating, and it's filled, as with all of his stories, with a lot of his own insights. Dickens in 1842 had gone to America. He was there celebrated as the great English writer, and he went to these kind of high society parties, dinners, balls. He went to theatrical productions, and he also was exposed to American society and American politics, and he used his perception of all this to write his story. So in Martin Chuzzlewit, Martin himself goes off to America, and that's where this scene takes place. So just to begin, he's at a dinner, a formal dinner in America with some military sort of guests. It was a numerous company, 18 or 20 perhaps. Of these, some 5 or 6 were ladies who sat wedged together in a little phalanx by themselves. All the knives and forks were working away at a rate that was quite alarming. Very few words were spoken, and everybody seemed to eat in his utmost in self-defence, as if a famine were expected to set in before breakfast time tomorrow morning, and it had become high time to assert the first law of nature. The poultry, which may perhaps be considered to have formed the staple of the entertainment, for there was a turkey on the top, a pair of ducks at the bottom, and 2 fowls in the middle, disappeared as rapidly as if every bird had had the use of its wings and had flown in desperation down a human throat. The oysters, stewed and pickled, leaped from their capacious reservoirs and slid by scores into the mouths of the assembly. The sharpest pickles vanished, whole cucumbers at once, like sugar plums, and no man winked his eye. Great heaps of indigestible matter melted away as ice before the sun. It was a solemn and awful thing to see. Dyspeptic individuals bolted their food in wedges, feeding not themselves, but broods of nightmares who were continually standing at livery with them. Spare men, with lank and rigid cheeks, came out unsatisfied from the destruction of heavy dishes, and glared with watchful eyes upon the pastry. What Mrs. Porkins felt each day at dinner-time is hidden from all human knowledge. But she had one comfort. It was very soon over. When the Colonel had finished his dinner, which event took place while Martin, who had sent his plate for some turkey, was waiting to begin, he asked what he thought of the boarders, who were from all parts of the Union, and whether he would like to know any particulars concerning them. "Pray," said Martin, "who is that sickly little girl opposite, with the tight round eyes? I don't see anybody here who looks like her mother, or who seems to have charge of her." "Do you mean the matron in blue, sir?" asked the Colonel, with emphasis. "That is Mrs. Jefferson Brick, sir." "No, no," said Martin. "I mean the little girl, like a doll, directly opposite." "Well, sir," cried the Colonel, "that is Mrs. Jefferson Brick." Martin glanced at the Colonel's face, but he was quite serious. "Bless my soul, I suppose there'll be a young Brick then one of these days," said Martin. "There are 2 young Bricks already, sir," returned the Colonel. "Jefferson Brick," he observed, after a short silence, in commendation of his correspondent, "is one of the most remarkable men in our country, sir." This had passed almost in a whisper, for the distinguished gentleman alluded to sat on Martin's other hand. "Pray, Mr. Brick," said Martin, turning to him, and asking a question more for conversation's sake than from any feeling of interest in its subject. "Who is that?" He was going to say young, but thought it prudent to eschew the word. "That very short gentleman yonder with the red nose." "That is Professor Mullet, sir," replied Jefferson. "May I ask what he is professor of?" asked Martin. "Of education, sir," said Jefferson Brick. He's a short schoolmaster, possibly, Martin ventured to observe. He is a man of fine moral element, sir, and not commonly endowed, said the war correspondent. He felt it necessary, at the last election for president, to repudiate and denounce his father, who voted on the wrong interest. He has since written some powerful pamphlets under the signature of Superbe, or Brutus reversed. He is one of the most remarkable men in our country, sir. There seem to be plenty of them, thought Martin, at any rate. Pursuing his inquiries, Martin found that there were no fewer than 4 majors present, 2 colonels, 1 general, and a captain, so that he could not help thinking how strongly officered the American militia must be, and wondering very much whether the officers commanded each other, or if they did not, where on earth the privates came from. There seemed to be no man there without a title, for those who had not attained to military honours were either doctors, professors, or reverends. 3 very hard and disagreeable gentlemen were on missions from neighbouring states, 1 on monetary affairs, 1 on political, 1 on sectarian. Among the ladies there was Mrs. Pawkins, who was a very straight, bony, and silent, and a wiry-faced old damsel, who held strong sentiments touching on the rights of women, and had diffused the same lectures. But the rest were strangely devoid of individual traits of character, insomuch that any one of them might have changed their minds with the other one, nobody else finding out. These, by the way, were the only members of the party who did not appear to be among the most remarkable people in the country. Several of the gentlemen got up, one by one, and walked off as they swallowed the last morsel, pausing generally by the stove for a minute or 2 to refresh themselves at the brass spittoons. A few sedentary characters, however, remained at a table full a quarter of an hour, and did not rise until the ladies rose, when all stood up. "Where are they going?" asked Martin, in the ear of Mr. Jefferson Brick. "To their bedrooms, sir." "Is there no dessert, or other interval of conversation?" asked Martin, who was disposed to enjoy himself after his long voyage. "We are a very busy people here, sir, and have no time for that," was the reply. So the ladies passed out in single file, Mr. Jefferson Brick and such other married gentlemen as were left, acknowledging their departure of their other halves by a nod. And there was, at the end of them, Martin thought this was an uncomfortable custom, but he kept his opinion to himself for the present, being anxious to hear and inform himself by the conversation of the busy gentlemen, who now lounged about the stove, as if a great weight had been taken off their minds by the withdrawal of the other sex, and who made a plentiful use of the spittoons and their toothpicks. It was rather barren of interest, to say the truth, and the greater part of it may be summed up in one word: dollars. All their cares, hopes, joys, affections, virtues, and associations seemed to be melted down into dollars. Whatever the chance contributions that fell into the slow cauldron of their talk, they made a gruel thick and slab with dollars. Men were weighted by their dollars, measures gauged by their dollars. Life was auctioneered, appraised, put up, and knocked down for its dollars. The next respectable thing to dollars was any venture having their attainment for its end. The more of that worthless ballast, honour and fair dealing, which any man cast overboard from the ship of his good name and good intent, the more ample stowage room he had for dollars. Make commerce one huge lie and mighty theft, deface the banner of the nation for an idle rag, pollute it star by star, and cut out the stripe by stripe as from the arm of a degraded soldier. Do anything for dollars. What is a flag to them? I mean, it's a pretty punchy statement, isn't it? And it sort of sums up what Dickens thought by this point in his trip to America. I'm not going to talk about it being relevant today, because that's for you to decide, not for me. Needless to say, Dickens did offend some of his American guests when he was over there, and particularly after he wrote this story. When he went back to America in 1868, he had to basically promise not to offend the Americans anymore. But there we go. I hope you enjoyed today's Lunchtime Live. I will see you here next Monday at midday.